Welcome to the Billionaires Book Club. I'm your host, Will, and today we will be talking about a book that I have read written by a billionaire. Now, today we're going to make an exception because this man, technically, he didn't actually become a billionaire when he died, but I would give him a huge exception because he helped create one of the largest companies in existence today, one that has served billions and is one of the most recognizable brands and companies in the entire world. McDonald's. It's ridiculous, this man's story. And I find it very interesting because he, along with Colonel Sanders, who started Kentucky Fried Chicken, they both started when they were pretty old. Ray Kroc, he started in his 50s, Colonel Sanders in his 60s, and now if you go to China, there are more KFCs and McDonald's than freaking Chinese people. Okay, not that much, but you get the point. They're everywhere. And let me just get started with probably the most interesting story that I came across while reading this book. Now, before I continue, I have to let you know, just to be honest, that I'm not finished the book. I'm about halfway through, and I just want to give you some of the major takeaways from this book because there's so many. And it is such a tragedy that so many people want to become successful in business, and yet no one bothers to read this $5 book that you can purchase on Amazon.com. I just think it is so sad. I mean, this man details his journey about how he became, how he was. He talks about things like sales and how as a person, as a salesperson, you have to sell differently to each individual because each individual is different. And yet, no one bothers to read these books about people who have created the most wealth in history. It's such a tragedy. Anyhow, I want to kick this off with probably the most exciting story about this book. So this is literally like, 20 minutes into the book. I was listening to it on audiobook, and this is such an interesting story. I find it so fascinating that two individuals who would later go on to found the largest companies, some of the largest companies in the history of the world, two of the most recognizable brands and companies in the world, Disney and McDonald's. The two people who are the hugest influences in starting these companies and growing them to what they were, they crossed paths when they were very young, 18, 19, when they were both pretty much nobodies, just normal people. I just find that so fascinating. And it's just so interesting seeing them cross paths. And it's mentioned in the book, and it's interesting how they saw each other. So technically, Walt Disney didn't actually recognize Ray Kroc or say anything, but Ray Kroc, he noticed Walt Disney. So here's how the story goes: World War I was going on, and they both wanted to serve, and he really wanted to serve, but his family was really against it. They didn't want him to die. Eventually, he convinced his family, okay, please at least let me serve in this sort of medical ambulance department. And they were like, okay, fine, you'll be the caretaker. You'll be the caretaker. And in order for him to serve, he had to lie about his age because he was too young. But here's where it gets interesting. There's only one other person in his department that he worked under that lied about his age. And this man was Walt Disney. And this is all he says about Walt Disney in this book. He says, there's only one other person who lied about his age, and that was a man named Walt Disney. Now, this man was a very interesting, weird type of person. Every week, when we would go out in the town and chase girls and buy burgers, this man would stay home and draw stuff. I don't know, weird character. His name was Walt Disney. And then he moved on with his story. And I just found that so fascinating, how these two people who would later grow and found some of the biggest, most recognizable companies in existence today, who have made a huge impact on the world and our society and our culture in a lot of ways than many other things. I mean, I can't go anywhere without hearing that Frozen song, or some kids singing about it, or some person referencing Frozen and how amazing that movie was. I haven't seen it. I will see it. Apparently it's amazing, and there will be Disney's still pumping out amazing stuff. But it's just so interesting seeing that and realizing how much potential a single person has. And, it's just so eerie and scary seeing that they don't know the potential that they hold. And it all just starts with something that they're passionate about, essentially. So, I mean, I could go on and on about that. But let's shift back to Ray Kroc. Now, this is a story of a man who really didn't have his career pathway set in stone, and you couldn't really chart his pathway to success. Up until his 50s, most people, 99% of people, would not have thought that he would have made as much money as he made and created this massive empire called McDonald's. So it's a story of hope, and it shows that if you aren't there yet, don't give up. So many people, they come out of college and they think that, if you don't have this crystal clear pathway or this job title, then you're screwed. And if you do, you're guaranteed success. And that's a huge, myth. That's a huge myth. Having said that, though, that doesn't mean you can be lazy and do nothing. Ray Kroc worked hard as heck, and he was a top salesperson. He was at the top of his bracket when he was selling. He did a lot of odd jobs here and there, a lot of them having to do with sales, and he was usually killing it, and he was working hard. I mean, really hard, to the point where he didn't believe in weekends. He didn't have weekends. He worked every single day. And there's this one story where shortly after he got married, he worked from the morning until 5, and then he ate, and then from like 6 to 8 he worked at another job in the music industry, and then 9 to 12 he would work some more. So he was working constantly until his wife complained about it, and then he eventually was able to get one day off on the weekend. So this man worked really hard, and it's just interesting seeing his journey. I mean, obviously he did a lot of selling. He sold a lot of different things, all sorts of stuff, from paper cups to malt mixers. And at the time, these seemed like amazing things because they were like these brand new things. Oh my goodness, a paper cup. That saying, it's just as good as sliced bread, or whatever, however people say that. It's as good as sliced bread. Those types of things, nowadays we take it for granted, but those were innovative things back in the day. They were like, what? Sliced bread? Paper cups? So he was selling these cool things, and this man, he also did a bunch of odd jobs too. He was a pianist, and he played piano to make a living after he got married, and the stuff with being a salesperson, for whatever reason, didn't work out anymore. And then, he went back to selling later on, and it was this huge journey. And I just find it so fascinating, and it's just such a story of hope. I mean, I see it in myself too, and I see it in others. People, they beat themselves up because they're not, doing anything glamorous or huge at the very present moment. I just think it's such a fascinating, amazing story. And there's more to it than that. I mean, this man had such a positive attitude in life. He was over 50 years old and had just heard about the McDonald's brother. Finally signed a contract with these brothers. And he had all sorts of illnesses. He had arthritis, he had diabetes, he had all these gland problems, thyroid gland problems, you name it. And he was aging. He was in his mid-50s. And you know what he said? You know what type of mindset he had? He said, I think my better days are ahead of me. And he was right. After the age of 50, until he died at the age of 81, he grew the most well-known establishment known to mankind, well, one of the most well-known, McDonald's. And I actually have taken a bunch of notes on all the takeaways, so I'm just going to go through them that I learned from just reading, the first segment of this book, Grinding It Out by Ray Kroc. And it's not everything I learned, I can't bottle it all down, but these are some of the big takeaways. And I have quite a few pages of this, front and back. So I want to just impart some with you. I've already mentioned quite a few already. But Let's keep going here. So he married quickly and early on. Again, I've seen this in a lot of billionaires. Sam Walton as well. I'm reading this book by Rich Davos. Rich is a billionaire behind Amway, and he was born a little after Ray Kroc, and his life is very similar as well. He worked really hard as a child, as did Ray Kroc. He did a lot of jobs. He was very entrepreneurial when he was a child. Did the paper route, all this sorts of stuff. But this isn't about him. This book isn't. This video is not about him. The point is, it's very interesting seeing that they all very, early on, they just married very quickly with a girl that they found was worthy. And you see it in Warren Buffett too. At the time, the culture was very different, and obviously there's more conservatism and traditionalism and all that going on. And I'm thinking, nowadays is things different. And I say, in certain ways, yes, but at the same time, I still see a lot of people who have only dated one or two other guys in their life, and then they marry and have kids. I see it all the time. I see it in different ethnicities, different backgrounds. So I don't think it's lost, and I still see a lot of different people from a lot of ethnicities, backgrounds, who are still very conservative, very religious, and so forth. So it's still there in a lot of ways. And I do think that whole genetic thing about guys wanting to play the field and be with a lot of girls, that's always been there. That's hardwired into most of guys' genetics. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to follow that or obey their genetics, but it's hardwired into us from a evolutionary biology standpoint, because we can spray and just move on, because we can produce sperm almost every single day, whereas the egg has to be matured on a monthly basis, which is why girls oftentimes are looking for committedness and long-term stability. But again, even then, that's such a generalized statement. You get girls who are looking for hookups too. I don't want to go too far, too off on a ramble, but it's very interesting. So it's interesting seeing that he married early on as well, just like Sam Walton did with his wife Helen, and Warren Buffett did with his wife. It's interesting to see that he was a top salesman. Not only was he a salesperson, but he was a top salesperson, and he had 30 plus years of sales experience when he first met the McDonald's brothers at the age of 55-ish, which I find very interesting. And I can't name how many billionaires had experience in sales before they got their business started. Warren Buffett, Mark Cuban, Sarah Blakely. Sarah Blakely was a top salesperson before she got into her company, Spanx. She was like one of the top 5% in her region of selling. I think it was fax machines. So she was really good at her trade as well, and on and on and on. He worked at all sorts of jobs, including a pianist, and he made good money. A lot of the times, he was making more money than his parents when he was a kid. Huge theme as well. Warren Buffett was killing it as a salesperson. He retrieved golf balls. He had this pinball empire. And so I think that's a common theme as well. Again, don't let that discourage you if you're not like some entrepreneur off the womb. I would say Michael Dell is an example of someone who really he focused on computers, as did Bill Gates. He wasn't necessarily someone who was selling off the bat. Oprah Winfrey and George Lucas. These are two people who I wouldn't say they were entrepreneurs off the bat either, and yet they're both billionaires. And George Lucas, I've heard a lot of billionaires, and I deem it true, a lot of them read a lot of books. But that's not necessarily the case. I don't think George Lucas read that many books as a child. If he did, they were fiction books, and they were like Lord of the Rings type books. And I think, yes, he did read a bit of fiction, and he did study a lot of English classes. So that's interesting in and of itself. Ray Kroc, as a child, he didn't like to read at all. And in fact, he was very different from his younger brother and sister. He couldn't even keep really a conversation going with his brother oftentimes. They were completely different. His younger siblings excelled in school. He failed in school. He screwed up tremendously in school. That's a great another lesson in that you don't necessarily have to succeed in school to succeed in business. This man screwed up in school. His father, Ray Kroc's father, dropped out of high school. He didn't get to go to high school, and therefore he wanted Ray to graduate high school. Did he do so? No. Ray dropped out of high school himself. He didn't like it. He wasn't good at school. And yet his brother went on to become a renowned medical researcher, and his brother and sister killed it in school. And he couldn't imagine how different they were. They were very different people. And so that's just another great illustration. Like, you can be completely different from your siblings. And I mean, at that moment, what do you think? I mean, most people at that time period, at that moment after they graduated, or his younger brother, who was 5 years younger than him, got this renowned job as a medical researcher, they would have thought, well, that's the brother who succeeded. There's that other brother who didn't. And I mean, technically, you couldn't even say that. I mean, technically, Ray Kroc was killing it in terms of the jobs he was doing as a salesperson to a certain extent. I mean, he wasn't, it didn't seem like he was making enormous amounts of fortunes based off how he was writing it. So again, arguably one could have said that, at that time period, people viewed his younger brother as the better person at that moment in time. It's just a, great measure about how you can't always measure your worth or value based on society and so forth, even though there's so much pressure that, makes you feel like that. So sometimes you have to remove yourself from that environment. I mean, look at the artist Vincent van Gogh, died of depression, cut off his ear, shot himself, and thought he was a failure. His paintings wouldn't even sell, and yet nowadays his paintings are worth tens of millions of dollars. And there's a lot of book authors like that too. I'm going off on a tangent. Ray Kroc, he was also a daydreamer. This man was very creative, and he daydreamed a lot. His family told him that it was a waste of time, but he never viewed it as a waste of time. He was very imaginative and very creative. And he said he wasn't wasting time because a lot of his imagining led to actual action. He imagined he would build a lemonade stand, and he did. And he made a lot of money off of that. So I guess it's a great lesson on how important creativity can be. So again, he wanted to help in World War I, and I think this was a common theme. Reading these books by Rich DeVos and Ray Kroc, they lived in a different time where it wasn't all about, I want to make money. I mean, none of these people really did it. They didn't, I mean, to a certain extent, they may have pursued money. Money was important to a certain extent, but, while they were young, they were also thinking about other things. It wasn't all about career and so forth. There were world wars going on. So they were focused on, I want to serve. I want to protect my country. It's okay if I die. These people went into it thinking that. And obviously they hoped that they would survive the war, and they did. But it's just interesting seeing how they came from a different time where saving was more important and the Great Depression was going on and so forth. So, nowadays, I don't know if it's an advantage or disadvantage because all these, I mean, I feel like our generation, because we grew up in a different time, we take a lot more for granted, and we're just all about that luxurious life. And that could be a disadvantage in certain ways. He had time for some fun. Although he worked a ton and he hustled as a kid and he did all this stuff, he still had a lot of fun. And again, it's the same thing with this man, Rich DeVos. He also hustled a lot, sold a lot, didn't have much time, did a lot of businesses, and was a salesperson. But at the same time, this man and Rich, they had time every week for burgers and movies. So that's interesting. So now let's talk about the McDonald's brothers. So he bumped into these fellows, and guess what? He convinced the McDonald's brothers to expand, even though they were happy as is. So here's how the story goes in a nutshell. He was selling these malt mixers. Then he got all these calls from all across the country about these McDonald's brothers and how they wanted a malt mixer just like the McDonald's brothers. So he checked these guys out, and he was like, wow, look at this establishment. It was a burger joint, but this place was on fire. And essentially, he tried to get them to expand. He was like, we have to expand, we have to make more stores like this. And he was like, you got to do this. And they were like, I don't really want to. We don't want to. We're happy living our life with just this one store. And we don't want to do any of this. And then Ray was like, how about I do it for you? How about you get someone else to expand for you? You can stay here at this one store, and you can reap a tremendous killing. I mean, the enormous amount of money you're making from the burgers, let alone the fries. I will make a killing off the malt mixers alone. I mean, this thing is just generating enormous cash, and it's such an innovative store, and I really think I can do it. And so they signed a contract, and they were off to the races at the ripe old age of 54ish. Next, so don't be afraid if you think things aren't working out. Some people think you need a clear path to success already as soon as you graduate school. Again, I've mentioned that's not always the case. So why was McDonald's innovative? So this first store was innovative because they did not skimp on quality. Ironic now, because now McDonald's is kind of known as the place that doesn't have quality stuff, but they get it to you fast and they're consistent with the food that they give you. But at the time, this was a one location establishment and they didn't skimp on quality. And what they did the best was their fries. So at the time, fries were just like this, mediocre thing that you had with burgers. And most other burger establishments were, skimpy on the oil they used. They used oil that was already used to fry chicken and other stuff. The McDonald's people, not only did they use clean oil to fry their fries, but they used the top of the line quality potatoes. And they cut it and cleaned it there on site. Kind of like Five Guys now, to a certain extent. So anyhow, in addition to that, they were harder to copy than expected. Ray Kroc went in there thinking, okay, this thing is pretty easy to copy. And lo and behold, it turns out it was not so much. So they had a competitive moat, which is a very important business concept in terms of staying ahead and being successful in your business, rather than just being overtaken by competitors or copied to death. And they were fast. So they were doing this new thing with fast food where you didn't really have to wait in line for waitresses to attend to you. And you guys know that story. Now they're the #1 fast food company in the world. So I just found this whole story very fascinating because McDonald's hit the $1 billion mark as a company in around 20 years. And that is saying something, considering it's a brick and mortar establishment. Whereas if you compare it to some of these high-tech growth companies that are, renowned as these industries of growth, such as Xerox and IBM, they took 40 to 60 years to hit the $1 billion mark. So, I mean, it goes back to the book Good to Great on how enormous growth and enormous money can be, grown through industries that you wouldn't expect it to be. All people nowadays, everyone's eyes are on the tech companies, but I don't think that's necessary. And I did another, book video, Billionaires Book Club video on the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and he emphasized a bit on how tech companies have such advantages and how you can scale so quickly in such a short time versus brick and mortar companies, and that's why you can hit the $1 billion mark and make a lot of money very quickly. And I mean, there is some truth to that. There are a lot of tech companies like Microsoft who have grown rapidly, very quickly, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. But at the same time, that doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean there's a lot of opportunities to do this, and that doesn't mean that you should focus on that. If your strengths are in brick and mortar, or the opportunities are elsewhere, sometimes that is for the better. And I mean, if I were to bet on whether or not Twitter or Facebook will be around in 10 years, I would not be that confident in my bet, even though I use them very frequently. Versus if I were to bet on Disney or McDonald's in being around in the next 10 or 50 years, I would be much more confident. Not exceptionally confident, but more confident than Twitter or Facebook, which is very interesting. I think it's just the nature of the industry and how fast it moves, though. But yeah, it's just saying something. And in the book, Good to Great, I mean, the company's profile that created enormous profits, greater than some of the most profitable companies in existence, in short, in 15 years time spans. I mean, some of these companies will raise eyebrows. Like, they're not what you would expect. They are not tech companies. There's stores like Walgreens, drugstores, brick and mortar companies. So again, that's one point I don't agree with billionaire investor Peter Thiel. Um, Moving on, Ray got into real estate, and that helped a lot. There's this whole story and saying that McDonald's is not a burger company, it's a real estate company. I would say it's a mix. It's a very innovative mix. The power of the burgers and the consistency and the branding and the service and the actual goods brings in people to the store, but it's also unique in that McDonald's owns a lot of the real estate, the actual land where these burgers are being served. So it is one of the biggest real estate companies in existence. Versus if you look at something like Chipotle, most of the time they're leasing or renting the space that they are, serving their food at. It's very interesting. Moving on, because time is short. These people were just regular folk most of their lives. Although Ray worked hard and was a top salesperson, I mean, they were, for the most of their lives, pretty ordinary folk. And reading their story is just kind of eerie because these people were alive and actual people not long ago. It wasn't like thousands of years ago they were alive, and nowadays it's almost like they were myths or legends. And I'm reading this stuff from ancient scripts. Sam Walton and Ray Kroc and Walt Disney, these people were alive like 50 years ago. They were like actual people walking around, which just blows my mind. And it's just like really interesting. And what they had in common was, they had a real business mindset, and they worked on this for most of their time on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I just find it so fascinating, like the potential we all hold. I mean, sometimes you don't know. Like, I'm reading this book called #GirlBoss, and I mean, for the first 24-ish years of her existence, you wouldn't have expected her to create and found this $100 million fashion business at all. She was just this, community college dropout who really didn't care a lot for business or companies, and shoplifted and was against the whole system and hitchhiked and dumpster dived. I mean, it's an interesting story, but she found something she loved, and that led to one thing and another. Wow, it's just a very fascinating story. So finally, seeing all these people, Rich Davos, Ray Kroc, I just think it's so fascinating. And I mean, Warren Buffett, he once visited China with Bill Gates, and he visited a Chinese factory. And this was a time and place where, he saw thousands of factory workers just working there, and that was their destiny, whether they liked it or not. That was their potential because the system didn't allow them to do anything else. And he looked at that crowd, that sea of people, and he said, I wonder how many Bill Gateses are in that crowd. And the point of it was just that, nowadays, based off certain systems and opportunities and situations in our life and economies, I mean, the American system is not perfect. Obviously, it's far from perfect, but it does have a certain amount of magic in it, allowing such enormous potential to be unearthed. And again, I don't think it's perfect. There's still a long way to go. And there's still, I think, a lot of tremendous potential that goes to the grave unearthed. I mean, not hatched. And I just think that's how it usually is for most people. Warren Buffett, another one of his quotes is that most people go to their graves with most of their potential not hatched, not used. And I just think that's so fascinating and just kind of eerie. But it's interesting. So the final thing I want to say is, Ray mentioned something that has been said numerous times by other billionaires, entrepreneurs, and millionaires and successful individuals, and that is that he loved what he did and he enjoyed his work. And I just think that's a very integral part of everything. So if you took away nothing else from this video, take action and start working towards or moving towards something where you can enjoy the work that you do. And it may take a while. For Ray, it took a while. For Sophia Amoruso, the author of #GirlBoss, it took a while. And for her, she had to go through a lot of jobs which she hated or didn't like. And those taught her, and sometimes they showed her certain aspects of her job that she did like, which she could later on use. And she makes a great point, which I've heard numerous times, which is that people are different. Some work or job that you may hate, another person may love. And therefore, each of us have to sort of work towards our own strengths and interests. And that diversity can be useful because perhaps you may hate video editing or social media or writing stuff. But for someone else, that's something that they live and breathe for. That's all I gotta say. And if anyone wants to help with some video editing for my videos, let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Peace.
Your sickness sustains me.
An enemy has been slain.
If I must.
Phase 2.
So be it, summoner.
You have slain an enemy.
You only need
Enemy
to
has
click
been
once,
slain.
fool.
Come one more time. Look out, catch.
Killing spree. Shut down. An enemy has been slain.
For great torment. Misery loves company.
An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain. You have been slain. Your team has destroyed a turret.
Don't blink. Step right up.
An enemy has been slain.
You only need to click once.
Killing spree. An ally has been slain.
Desolation is coming.
Rampage. You have slain an enemy. An enemy has been slain.
This whole living thing is highly overrated.
Come here.
An ally has been slain. Aced. Your team has destroyed